The opening of the film is a wide-angle shot of a sizable desert. Richard is traveling in his own helicopter with his girlfriend Jen when they arrive at a stunning home in the midst of the desert. As a welcome gift, the pilot of the chopper gives Richard a small packet of a plant called payat as Richard is exploring the home and makes it to the bedroom. A little while after Jen seduces him, and they have a passionate and private night, Richard gets a call from Jen confessing that he is married and cheating on his wife. The following morning, Jen wakes up in her pajamas and goes to the kitchen to get some water and an apple to eat. As she turns around, she is startled to see two men standing outside. A house he introduces one of them as Stan and the other as Dmitri, and the three men have plans to go hunting together. Meanwhile, Stan seems to be interested in Jen and her attractive body that evening. The four of them are seen sitting by the side of the pool and talking to each other. It turns out that they are Richard's friends, but he is not happy to see them arrive earlier than he expected. He wanted to keep his relationship with Jen a secret, but now they know about it. Richard notes that the substance is a powerful psychedelic with negative effects. Richard instructs Jen to hide the drug somewhere secure as he notices the lads are interested in the reward, and continues by saying that a person who consumed this substance once cut his own legs because he felt no pain. To entertain Richard and his friends, Jen, who is also interested in the drug, keeps it in her necklace and begins to play music and dance. Stan, who is one of the three, then appears to be deeply attracted to Jen, much to his luck. Richard and Jenny enter into a dance with Stan, but as they dance, they become a little too close physically, and as a result, Richard nods out. The next morning, when Jen wakes up to look for Richard, Stan tells her that he's out for some work and won't be back until the afternoon. However, Dmitri is attempting to recover from his hangover. Stan is desperate to spend time with Jen, but she is uninterested and goes back to her room. While she is changing clothes, Stan sneaks into the room and declares his desire to have a sexual relationship with Jen. However, Jen rejects him, and Stan is unable to bear the rejection. When Jen cries for help, Dmitri witnesses the assault but chooses to ignore it instead of leaving them alone and turning on the TV. A few hours later, when Richard returns, he realizes something is amiss. When he asks his pals, Stan just replies that there has been a minor issue involving Jen. Richard enters the room to check on her, but Jen won't budge from her insistence that she wants to return home. When Richard realizes that Stan exploited Jen's absence, he gets into a fight with his friends over what they did. In order to defuse the situation, Richard offers Jen a large sum of money to forget what happened, but Jen is apprehensive and wants to go home. She even threatens to tell his wife about their relationship. Richard gives Jen a strong smack in the heat of the moment. She instantly flees the house and Richard and his pals pursue her until they catch up to her at the edge of a cliff. Richard tries to convince Jen to approach her, but unexpectedly pushes Jen down the cliff with the intent to kill her. Jen lands on a dry tree at the base of the cliff, where the tree pierces her body and holds her. When Stan and Dmitri inquire as to why Richard took such extreme measures, they are shocked by this as they didn't anticipate him to kill his girlfriend. Richard tells the guys to continue their hunt, as if nothing occurred after explaining that she might have sentenced all of them to 15 years in prison for their crimes. On the other hand, we see Jen, who is still alive and clinging to the dried tree despite the blood loss and the tree's penetration of her body. She is still somewhat conscious of her surroundings and manages to pick up a lighter that she frequently carries with her and light a fire to burn the roots of the dry tree, so she can lie down on the ground believing that Jen is now dead. Richard and his friends are on their way to clean up her dead body, but when Jen hears engine sounds, she knows the men are back to dispose of her body. Gathering all the strength she can, she crawls away to hide from their view. When they arrive at the cliff, they are shocked to discover that Jen is still alive, so to finish what they started, the three drive down to the base of the cliff. In the meantime, Jen uses this opportunity to move further away from where she is currently hiding. This makes it easier for them to track her, so they do so and begin to follow her. However, they soon discover that the blood trail ends at a lake, so the three decide to split up and locate her. Richard and Dmitri go in opposite directions, whereas Stan chooses to stay there and look up as she returns. Although he was brave enough to begin all of this, Stan appears to be frightened out of his mind. It turns out that Jen is still in the lake, and when she hears the sound when Dmitri leaves, she exits the lake and begins to search for him. A short while later, she spots Dmitri urinating in the distance with his rifle a short distance away. Jen views this as an opportunity to seize the gun, but sadly, Dmitri constructed this trap to entice her in. Dmitri tells his friends right away that he has found Jen and will take her back to where they'd parted ways. Before taking her back, Stan, who had been stiff and afraid earlier, calms down and relaxes. For the trouble she caused, Dmitri begins to torture her. But Jen manages to take a knife from him and stab him in the eye, causing him to bleed to death. Jen then takes all of his weapons and uses his bike to travel a distance, but the bike eventually stops as if it ran out of gas despite her weakness. After a long and exhausting travel, she decides to stay in the cave and treat her wound there after getting off the bike and continuing to walk while carrying the backpack and the weapons. The hallucinogenic drug that Jen kept in her locket comes to mind as she lies down in pain, and she immediately eats it to gain strength despite the fact that it tastes terrible. Jen then begins to have a strange experience as she suddenly gains the courage to perform an emergency treatment of her wound. She feels no pain, so she decides to take out the piece of wood from her locket. To stop the bleeding, now Richard can't find Jen, so Jen warms the beer can and places it on top of her wound. The next morning, Stan awakens to a bloody surprise. Instead, he went hunting. The two discuss how Dmitri will soon invite Jen over, and everything will be over. When Stan sees Dmitri's dead body floating in the distance while approaching the lake to wash his face, he is startled and loses it entirely. Richard closely examines Dmitri's body and surmises that Jen must have done that because they are now forced to dispose of Dmitri's body in the lake. Despite Stan's objections, Richard decides to depart without him in order to find Jen as Jenna continues to experience hallucinogenic-related dreams. After a small game of chase and hide-and-seek between them, Stan ties his socks across his shoulder while he hides and prepares to attack from behind. But because he was shot in the shoulder there, he misses his target. Jen sits in the car as Richard tries to reach Stan on the radio after she is successful in killing her attacker. Richard knows he's alone, and on top of that he's tired and paranoid, so he decides to head home and calls the helicopter to pick him up. He arrives home where he's seen taking a shower just when he hears a suspicious sound, and Richard suspects that Jen has now come for him. After trying to contact Stan several times without an answer, Richard concludes that Stan might have been killed by Jen, so cautiously approaching with a revolver in hand, he checks. Jen immediately shoots Richard when she sees him, but thankfully for Richard, he is still alive and manages to hide under the sofa as Jen searches for him. Jen slips on the blood-covered floor as Richard binds his wound with food wraps to stop bleeding. Richard now has the upper hand and begins abusing her. As the movie ends, bleeding but victorious Jen walks out of the home as the helicopter approaches in the distance.